2020 season has certainly been a roller coaster for the Chicago Bears. After a 5-1 start gave way to a 6-game losing streak in the middle of the year, the Bears somehow backed their way into the playoffs before a frustrating wild-card loss to the Saints. While going into the year, many would have suspected that this is because of a dominant defense carrying a bad offense. Quite frankly, the opposite occurred over the last portion of the season. As the defense regressed over the back half of the year, the offense picked up the slack down the stretch, an incredible turnaround considering how anemic they were for the majority of the year. Keep in mind that before their bye week, the Bears averaged 19.1 points per game, 19 first downs per game, 301 yards per game, and 4.67 yards per play. After the bye, the script completely flipped, averaging 30.2 points per game, 25 first downs per game, 382 yards, and 5.74 yards per play. And they even had a 4-game stretch where they scored at least 30 points or more, the first time that's been done in Bears franchise history since 1965. So what went into this unforeseen turnaround? Was it a schematic shift, a change at play caller, going back to Trubisky at quarterback, or is it a variety of factors all coming together at the same time? Most importantly, is this improvement sustainable? These were the questions I looked to answer when digging into the tape. For this episode of The Film Room, here's what I've found. Starting with schematic changes, it has to be pointed out that much of the Bears' recent success has to do with a heavy emphasis on an outside zone run scheme with a lot of play action and bootleg working off of it, typically seen in the Kubiak, Shanahan, McVay coaching tree. We saw shades of this throughout the first 3 weeks of the season with Trubisky under center, but the offense shifted to much more of what we saw in the first 2 years under Matt Nagy with Nick Foles in at quarterback. For perspective, before the bye week, the Bears ran 12 personnel, which features 1 running back, 2 tight ends, and 2 wide receivers on 16% of their snaps. This created more spread formations with multi-layered passing concepts dependent on reading the coverage. The Bears were also one of, if not the most pass-happy team in the NFL, calling the highest percentage of passing plays on early downs with a 60% rate. After the bye week, some of these trends completely flipped, as the Bears increased their use of 12 personnel to 26% of the snaps, using more tight formations to help disguise their intentions before the snap on offense. In these condensed sets, the Bears ran a variety of different actions while still looking the exact same before the snap, causing hesitancy from the defense. The Bears also put a heavier emphasis on pre-snap motion, especially with their wide receivers, a common thing seen with the McVay offenses. The Bears also put a heavier emphasis on the running game with an early down run percentage of 48%. This bled into their play action that went hand in hand and meshed pretty much perfectly together. Out of 235 passing plays called in the last 6 regular season games, 92 of these, or 39%, involved some form of play action, bootleg, or rollout design. What these plays did, more often than not, was split the field in half, making the reads much more simpler and easier to process. This Cole Kmet touchdown against the Lions is a good example, as it was pretty much directly stolen from the Rams playbook. In the red zone, the Bears quickly line up to catch the Lions off guard before immediately snapping the ball. The scheme is simple enough, with a play-action bootleg as Kmet comes across the grain behind the line of scrimmage. Because the Lions' defense is unprepared and moving one direction, they can't catch up in time to Kmet on the dump-off pass, which goes for an easy touchdown. While Nagy has stolen plenty of concepts from other offenses, that doesn't mean he hasn't added his own wrinkles to that foundation as well. One such wrinkle is a tight end wheel that's been added to said play-action bootlegs. I first saw this against the Tennessee Titans and has since become a staple of the offense after the bye week. We see it here in this play versus Jacksonville. The play starts off the same as any of their bootleg actions, with a play action fake to get the defense moving to the left while Kmet comes across the formation and Jimmy Graham releases to the flat. Once Trubisky starts rolling out and Graham reaches the sideline, he starts working his way upfield to put the flat defender into conflict. This creates an easy read and throwing window for Trubisky, who hits Graham for the first down. Personnel changes have also been a huge part of the Bears' recent success, especially along the offensive line. The offensive line was a big problem during the middle of the season for the Bears, whether it be due to injuries to key players such as James Daniels, Bobby Massey, and even Cody Whitehair for a few games, or the coaching staff's stubborn insistence on starting Rashad Coward. The offensive line completely dragged down this offense going into the bye week. For perspective, in the first 10 games of the season before the bye week, the Bears only had 12 explosive runs, averaging 3.6 yards per carry with a league-low 40% success rate. The Bears' offensive line also had their fair share of struggles in pass protection, especially when adjusting to the statuesque Nick Foles in a quarterback. Things solidified for the Bears with their current group to end the season, with Leno at left tackle, Whitehair moving out to left guard, Sam Mustipher starting at center, Alex Bars at right guard, and Jermaine Ifedi kicking out to right tackle. In the final 6 games of the regular season, the Bears had 15 explosive runs, averaging 4.9 yards per carry with a 56% success rate, both above league average. Their pass protection has been fantastic as well for the most part, giving Trubisky all day to throw on most passing plays. One advantage of this lineup is that Whitehair's play has been fully unlocked since moving back to his original and more natural left guard position. This play against the Packers is a great example as Whitehair uses his strength to maul and completely redirect Dean Lowry out of the hole to give David Montgomery a huge lane to run through. Mustipher has been solid at center as well, giving the Bears a level of competence despite a lack of physical traits. This Montgomery touchdown run is a fantastic showcase of Mustipher working well with Whitehair to seal off the one-tech defensive tackle, where Whitehair completely pancakes him, by the way, before Mustipher works his way to the linebacker and seals him off so that Montgomery can do the rest. Speaking of Montgomery, the play of the offensive line has been a huge reason for his success, as we're seeing him develop into a potential breakout star. In the 10 games before this group took shape, Montgomery struggled to find running room given a lack of blocking support, averaging only 1.12 yards before contact per carry. Since the bye week, though, that average shot up to 2.87 yards before contact per carry, and Montgomery has responded with the best stretch of play of his young career. Over the last 6 games of the regular season, Montgomery had 598 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns on 5.16 yards per carry. Combine this with his receiving skill set out of the backfield, and you get one of the few running backs in the NFL that actually makes a difference for an offense's success. Now, it wouldn't be a video about the Bears offense without mentioning the quarterback position, as many fans have wondered how much the quarterback change back to Trubisky impacted the offense's success. For the type of offense that the Bears are running, I'd say quite a bit. With Foles at quarterback, the offense just did not function the same. With the offensive line as bad as it was, Foles' lack of mobility was a huge liability as he couldn't extend plays when things broke down. Additionally, his lack of athleticism limited what the Bears could call with their play-action bootleg game. Watching Foles attempt to make plays throwing on the run just isn't a pretty sight, to put it kindly. You add in Foles' lack of natural arm strength in the mix on underneath routes, which limited yards after the catch opportunities. The Bears' offense was just a bland mess, culminating in a low point on Monday Night Football when the offense managed a measly 156 yards against the porous Vikings defense. Enter Mitch Trubisky. While Trubisky has definitely had his rocky moments since returning, he's had one of his better stretches from a production standpoint in this offense. For the most part, he looked confident and decisive, which the offense has certainly benefited from. One of the reasons for Trubisky's comfort has been the Bears' use of extensive play action to help simplify the offense and hide his weaknesses while accentuating his strengths. In the final 6 games of the regular season, on play action bootleg design rollouts, Trubisky was 60 of 83 for 757 yards, going 9.12 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns with 1 interception, and 111.37 passer rating, and an adjusted net yards per attempt of 9.07. All fantastic numbers all around. Furthermore, the Bears have asked Trubisky to focus far more on the short passing game as opposed to throwing the ball down the field where his accuracy tends to wane. Over the last 6 games of the regular season, Trubisky's intended air yards per attempt was 6.3 yards past the line of scrimmage, which puts a heavy emphasis on receivers picking up yards after the catch. That turned out to be the case, as the Bears averaged 5.85 yards after the catch per completion in the same time span. Overall, Trubisky's ability to throw the ball on the run in either direction opened up a lot of options for the passing game, which created more juice when the offense was functioning well. Undoubtedly, Trubisky's best game of the season was against Houston. Trubisky was efficient in the first half, getting the ball to his playmakers, and he even made some tight window throws such as this goal line touchdown to Allen Robinson. This 11-yard completion to Kmet is one of the more impressive passes of the day, as he doesn't panic to the immediate pressure off the bootleg and throws an accurate dart at an awkward angle across his body to allow Kmet to pick up the first down after the catch. Now, this does bring us to the question of whether this offense can be sustainable or not going into the future, and in all honesty, that conversation starts and ends with Trubisky. While Trubisky has produced well and looked good at times over this past stretch of games, a lot of that success has come as a result of smokes and mirrors from the design of the offense. As mentioned earlier, Trubisky has found a good rhythm in the play-action rollout style of offense, but problems began to arise on traditional dropbacks as well as when he was forced to go off schedule. After getting his starting job back, Trubisky was 88 of 128 on all traditional dropback passes in the regular season for 841 yards on 6.57 yards per attempt, throwing for 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions for a passer rating of 89.36 and an adjusted net yards per attempt of 5.32. Those numbers may not look too terrible on the surface, although they certainly aren't good, but they also don't tell the full story either. All 6 of those touchdowns came as a result of short, quick passes in the red zone on one-read plays. Trubisky wasn't hitting deep shots down the field, he wasn't dissecting defenses before the snap for chunk plays that led to scores, and he wasn't extending plays to make something out of nothing off script when the defense gave him an unexpected look. Without the touchdowns to pad his numbers, Trubisky was just simply a really inefficient passer when forced to drop back and play quarterback. Trubisky's the same guy we've seen over the years. He still has significant struggles when it comes to processing, reading coverages post-snap, and going through his reads efficiently instead of locking onto one receiver. Trubisky completely shuts down when facing immediate pressure, and even when he gets a sit in a clean pocket, he isn't comfortable either, such as this play versus the Jaguars, where he slides his way into pressure and overthrows Kmet as he sits in the unoccupied zone. His 2 red zone interceptions against the Vikings and Jaguars are also shining examples of his erratic decision-making in critical situations. These are simply passes that can't be made by a 4th-year starting quarterback with this much experience under his belt. Maybe the biggest hole in Trubisky's game, however, is his inability to challenge defenses deep, which ultimately caps the upside of any offense he's a part of. Over the last 3 years, Trubisky has statistically been one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL on deep passing, and 2020 wasn't an exception in that regard. According to Sports Info Solutions, Trubisky was the 2nd least accurate passer in the NFL on throws of 20 yards or more down the field for quarterbacks with a minimum of 20 such attempts. The Bears would have actually been better off if Trubisky just spiked the ball into the turf as opposed to attempting passes of 15 or more yards down the field this season, as he completed only 17 of 54 said passes for 400 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions for a 32.95 passer rating. Without that explosive element in the passing game, the consistency on offense just isn't going to be there for 17 weeks, which takes us to another aspect that must be considered. When looking at the defenses that Trubisky has faced this season, on average these units rank 22nd in EPA, 23rd in DVOA, and 25th in yards per play. If you just look at the Bears' 4-game streak of 30-plus point games against the Lions, Texans, Vikings, and Jaguars, those average rankings equate to 30th, 28th, and 30th, respectively. All of this leads me to the Bears' last 2 games of the season against the Packers and Saints, where this offense was exposed to a degree. Now, contrary to what some may believe, the Bears actually had a similar game plan to what worked for them during their 4-game 30-plus point streak. And the plan was pretty simple: run the ball early and often, rely on yards after the catch to move the chains off bootleg action, and then set up the defense for deep shots down the field late in the game off of play action. Unfortunately, the Packers and Saints were able to shut down 2 key pieces of the Bears' offensive attack that are required for success with this style of offense: the run game and chunk plays off of play action. Against the Packers, for instance, when you take out Trubisky's 4 runs off scrambles, the Bears average only 3.19 yards per carry. Combine this with the Packers' plan to stop the Bears' bootlegs, which featured edge players blitzing Trubisky off his fakes to force quick checkdown decisions and playing certain coverages to bracket deep routes, the Bears simply weren't able to generate any explosive plays. Remember that tight end wheel bootleg we talked about earlier? The Bears called that once again in the second quarter against the Packers. Only this time, the Packers pretty much play it perfectly. Rashawn Gary is aggressive, pressuring Trubisky off the play fake as we see here, which forces him to have to make a quick decision to check the ball down to Kmet or hit Graham up the sideline. What complicates things is Jair Alexander, who is essentially playing both Graham and Kmet at the same time, hoping to bait Trubisky into a bad decision. Trubisky makes the wise move to check down to Kmet here, but an extra second or two could have been enough to force Alexander to commit to the flat route and hit Graham over the top. Now, with all that said, I still think Trubisky missed on a few opportunities here and there. On the Bears' first drive of the game, Trubisky is late and wildly inaccurate on this play-action out route to Mooney, and then later in the second half, I feel like he checks downs way too quickly to David Montgomery here as well. The Packers show cover 3 before switching to cover 2 before the snap. Trubisky must have seen this and felt uncomfortable with the look post-snap, so he lives to fight another down, but if we look at this thing develop, Miller is about to break open on a crossing route in the intermediate portion of the field. There are also things outside of Trubisky's control, such as that devastating drop from Wims that basically set the tone for the Saints game as well. But other than that, though, the Packers and Saints had good game plans to slow down this Bears offense, attacking the main thing it does well and forcing Trubisky to beat them from the pocket, which we know he just doesn't do very well. This brings me all the way back to the question at hand: is this sustainable? While it may seem like a cop-out, the answer for me is a combination of yes and no. Certainly, I feel like Nagy, Bill Lazor, and their staff have found something by adopting this outside zone play-action scheme that helps raise the floor of any offense. But if this offense is ever to reach its full potential, the Bears need to have a quarterback capable of providing them with a counterpunch in the event that teams take away their rushing production and bootleg game. Is that Trubisky? At this point, probably not, and it'll be interesting to see what the Bears do in the offseason to account for this. To end this on a positive note, however, it should be noted that this recent uptick in play shows that the Bears do have talent on offense. If they can somehow retain Allen Robinson in the offseason, they have a legit number 1 wide receiver. Darnell Mooney is a very capable number 2 and a very good deep threat. David Montgomery is emerging as one of the better running backs in the NFL. At tight end, Cole Kmet has shown some nice things as a complementary piece. And finally, the offensive line, while still lacking talent in certain areas, has shown that they aren't far off from being a more than capable unit. There are pieces to work with here on this offense. Only time will tell whether they can continue to put it all together.